Welcome today to our episode of ShiftED podcast. Today we have the legendary Gary Stager with us to talk about all things life, really. Thanks for joining me today, Gary. How you doing?
Good. It's a gloomy day here in Los Angeles, but happy to see you.
Yeah, it's great to see you. Did you get some tennis practice in before
Later, I played a Mean Girls tonight.
Nice. What got you into playing tennis anyway? Like, what is it about the game that you're just like? I've seen that you've been doing a lot of practices. You got a lot of training. What is it about tennis that clicks with you?
Ironically, I had a crazy middle school band director who ran an after-school tennis activity when I was in the sixth grade. And so I did that, and I was never athletic. In fact, I kind of marvel at my ability to do anything on a tennis court now, because I literally had special gym as a kid. Now it has a fancy title like adaptive PE or something, but I literally got pulled out of class for extra gym because I was so uncoordinated. And when the pandemic, I always liked tennis, and I always thought it was a good way to get exercise, but I didn't play it. And I belonged to a tennis club that I used for the gym, which I never went to, and never paid up for tennis because I was traveling too much. And then the pandemic fixed that.
Right.
And right around the time of the pandemic, I had a orthopedic doctor who I'd been seeing for my terminally bad legs and some lower back pain, and he said, "Get some cardio." So I thought, okay, I'll start playing tennis. And it's been interesting. It's been interesting to watch. I've taken lessons with a lot of different people, and it's been an opportunity to see good instruction and bad instruction. This sort of the exercise in making friends with normal people has been interesting. Although I believe I achieved peak popularity during the global, deadly, once in a century pandemic, I seem to be considerably less attractive now. But then I started losing some weight, and then I became kind of obsessive about that. So it's all been good.
That's great. That's a great. Cool journey. Yeah, the pandemic shifted a lot of things.
Indeed.
Before we jump into that, Gary, I've always wanted to ask you some of your earliest memories of doing what you do now. Like, where do you think it started? Where do you think your passion for teaching and always pushing that innovation button further? Like, where did you first start to feel like this was going to be something I would do for a long time?
There's definitely a through line, but the question, I have to come at the answering that question from a couple of different angles. One was, I'm a product of public school education in New Jersey, about 25 miles west of New York City. And my public school education was as terrible and as great as anyone's. When I read about the epidemic of bullying and the stuff that I went through as a kid who weighed 58 pounds in eighth grade and had a big mouth, it's kind of the stuff of movies or criminal indictments today. Having said that, there were always teachers that I hung out with. There was always some teacher that I had a relationship with, even some of the ones who were kind of abusive. And some of them, not the abusive ones, I'm still in contact with today. So that's one answer. The second answer, more specifically about the work that I do, is the things that bring me the most beauty and joy and meaning and purpose in my life are things that I was introduced to in a public middle school classroom. I fell in love with composing music and playing music, and learned about jazz and learned how to program computers around the seventh grade at Schuyler Colfax Junior High School in Wayne, New Jersey. And part of my passion is rooted in a desire to ensure that future kids and my grandkids aren't denied of similar high quality experiences. Um, in the seventh grade, I had Mr. Jones for a computer programming class. I'm not sure what it was called. It was between baking a souffle and making a tie rack. It was in that sort of, make the kids do something for 9 weeks kind of approach to middle school. And that was in 1975. The school district where I grew up got a timeshare system in terminals, I believe in 62 or 64. It's kind of extraordinary. So by 75, there was an expectation that every kid would spend 9 weeks in middle school learning how to program computers. And for the first time in my life in Mr. Jones's class, I felt smart. I felt capable and creative and competent because we didn't know what was impossible. We thought anything was possible. We pulled each other up by our bootstraps. We challenged one another. There was a several-year period during which we hadn't seen software that wasn't written by someone we knew directly. I remember when we saw the first commercial software, it was kind of like a Gods Must Be Crazy moment. What is this amazing thing? And then I spent the rest of junior high and high school kind of signing up for as much elective computing time as possible, and spent an awful lot of time programming during those years. And then graduated high school in 1981 thinking, well, that computer stuff was a fun distraction, but no one will ever have a computer. That's ridiculous. And 6 months later, I had a job teaching kids programming, and within a year, I was teaching teachers, and I've been kind of doing the same thing ever since. And my instincts about using a computer as an intellectual laboratory and vehicle for self-expression, a way of making things, and the power of debugging and how that matches young person's remarkable capacity for intensity has kind of remained consistent through a lot of the work that I've done.
Right. What's the cross section going between programming and music? Like, where do they meet? Because you were mentioning that you started off with a passion of music, and then programming was like, is there a cross section? Do they connect?
I mean, undoubtedly, and lots of people have done work in this area. I could speak to the specifics. I'll only talk about it from my perspective. I think it matches, like I said, young people's remarkable capacity for intensity. It's something you can really throw yourself into and look at from a variety of perspectives and get lost in. And you're making something out of nothing, just elemental blocks, and that has an increasing degree of difficulty the better you get at it, and kind of doesn't disappoint you. And one of the things that makes me sad that so many kids are deprived of these experiences is that how the sort of power and joy that comes from being lost in a problem that's bigger than yourself, but that you have a sense you can make sense of and come out the other end better for it. So, the reason, I went off to pursue a career in being a jazz musician. I had a scholarship to Berklee College of Music, and I pursued that until my conspicuous lack of talent caught up with me. And so I don't think it's how do I say this? I think programming is more democratized than being an artist. It's not clear to me that everyone could be a great artist. In fact, I'm positive that's not the case. And I'm often finding myself in contexts where I have to say to people, well, obviously you've never been around anyone who's great at something. But I think lots of people can be really good programmers. And I think programming is a way of making sense of the world and having agency over an increasingly complex and technologically sophisticated era.
Absolutely. Well, I do share your envy of great musicians. I've encountered many where they can pick a tune up from a second of listening to something and can play right along to it. And it's I always marveled at people that have that capacity to just internalize something so quickly and then just throw it back out at you. So it's I'm astonished by the arrogance that I once possessed of thinking that I could do this thing. I've got friends who are among I've been blessed to have friends who are among the greatest jazz musicians in history, and the infinite complexity of what they do is a miracle. And
well beyond my pay grade. And the best I
Yeah.
could do now is share their stories and pay to go hear them perform and publish books by some of them and such things like that. But yeah, I mean, but again, it's I often say that schools have an obligation to introduce children to things they don't yet know they love.
Right.
That's our primary
I like that.
responsibility as educators. And I fell in love with stuff that really has served me well through my life that I wouldn't have discovered on my own or on television. And I was at an event a week ago where someone was talking about designing a school where they had a media wing, and it was media because art and music and drama are part of media. And I was, no. That's media is just commerce. Become good at something, and the commerce will take care of itself. There's a vulgarity to that, and there's a Quincy Jones quote that I won't get exactly right, but he says something like, "When you're thinking about money, God leaves the room," and and this connects to computing and computer programming. Lots of schools are interested in entrepreneurship,
Mm-hmm.
and then it's about
yeah.
making a pitch and printing a brochure. But how about having a skill that's sellable? And how about teaching kids to place Facebook ads or build WordPress sites or write computer programs, and make them and have them create a Fiverr account and actually produce some revenue and a service that's of value, and develop skills that can serve them, whether as a side hustle or as a future career path.
Absolutely.
The entrepreneurship will take care of itself. I'm routinely desperate for high school kids who can actually edit a video or write a little bit of code, or figure out, like I said, online advertising systems. And it just we always want to fetishize the most trivial notion of the trivial part of a pursuit, and that's often focusing on the making a buck. Right. Even if and implicit in making a buck is everyone's a genius. You don't actually have to be good at anything or know anything. You just have to know the game.
Right. It's funny though how, because I agree with you, and I see this in the schools and the environments that I work with, where it's not about looking to the future almost and imagining the possibilities that are going to be out there, and how do we get our kids prepared for that. It's really still this fixation on the immediacy of the next assignment, the next test, the next whatever it is that we're having them produce and jump through the hoops with. And I know that you've this has been something in your forefront for a long time, but where does the shift start to happen, where we start giving back to the kids, where we start saying, can we focus more on what their future is going to be like rather than what's happening right now, or which happened 100 years ago?
I think the best way to serve the kids is to focus on what's right now. Look, I don't have a crystal ball about what the future is going to hold, but like I said, the skills and things I fell in love with in junior high have served me pretty well, and the habits of mind that I developed. And I don't need to be worrying about which programming language kids are going to be using in the future. That's just a way of distracting us from teaching them how to program now. So I'm actually, I think the immediacy of now is not a bad thing. I think, if you want to study entrepreneurs, they've all got a story about how at 12 years old, they did something that made them a couple bucks, and that led them on a path to Shark Tank, or to Richard Branson or Mark Cuban, or pick anyone who's sort of captured the public's imagination about becoming a billionaire. They almost always have some story of something they did as a teenager that lit a fire in them, that showed them their capacity as learners, their ability to adapt, to communicate, to collaborate, to create. I'm not the least, I've done a keynote on a number of occasions called "Frankly, I'm Bored with the Future." We're always jumping to the yeah, but, and I know, everyone wants to talk about AI these days, and the very same people who are obnoxiously putting AI and education expert in their LinkedIn profiles are the very same people who have been fighting me for 40 years when I say that every kid should learn how to program.
Right.
Because they want to talk about stuff. They don't want to know how to do anything. And one of the most powerful experiences I had with my mentor and friend and colleague Seymour Papert was when he asked us what were we thinking about doing with some kids next. And when we answered, he replied, "And what can they do with that?" So it's funny too, because there may be an opportunity here for some finding common ground with people who we don't agree with politically or ideologically. I know, for example, Newt Gingrich, who's kind of a repugnant human being and former Speaker of the House in the United States, and he used to talk a lot about what it feels like to a poor kid to be handed $5 for something that they did, and how to kind of life changing, and literally there's the stuff that we could be teaching kids in a computing class could be something that people around the world are paying them for, because the internet makes it possible to set up a little business and do that. But instead, I'm finding 15-year-old kids who can't take a photo with an iPhone, and a generation of people who still don't know how to find their file or copy and paste.
For sure.
Right.
It's this cognitive fallacy a little bit, right, of these digital natives that we're producing, where like I have a hard time seeing that as you mentioned, to just do the simplest of tasks, and just having this in a
so kids you can sort of punch in the face and go, some digital native, you can't even use an iPhone. And right. If you say to teachers, how come you've had a laptop for 30 years and you don't know how to use your trackpad? Then you get into trouble. But the kids could take the punch, and someone ought to be calling them out on it. We need to raise our expectations. The helplessness is unattractive at best and unproductive. Right. And it's our fault. It's our fault. The standards are way too low. And when I say standards, I mean it in the literal and figurative sense. Because if you look at the standards that are passed out, the 5,000-page, colorful brochures with the meaningless tables of vocabulary that kids are supposed to, that doesn't lead to any kind of understanding or functionality or fluency. Right. But we also ought to have the standard that kids can actually do things. Why do we live at a time where we actually can talk about computer science unplugged or hour of code? Have we somehow run out of computers? Have we somehow run out of hours? Right? Why should these
bizarre?
Why should these be acceptable norms that we just sort of nod our heads to? Oh yeah. Right. And just one more thing. So the thing I often think about, this Mr. Jones's class in 7th grade. First of all, he was a remarkable educator. He had to have been. He had 1 or 2 teletypes in his classroom and 25 or 30 kids, and he kept us engaged. But it seems to me that it's maybe not such a bad idea to have a 9-week period somewhere in kids' education where every kid has a programming experience. And maybe now we need to do it in 3rd or 4th grade so that they can develop some fluency and some agency over the system. And then, by the time they get to adolescence, some kids will choose computer science as their project. We make a billion decisions about some arbitrary nonsense that all kids should learn. It seems to me that we could come together and say, hey, look, we could really spend a few months making sure kids can make the computer dance.
Absolutely. Well, I think too, a lot of like teachers' hesitation too is this feeling of not feeling like an expert, or like, what if they run into a problem, and I mean, what am I going to do if I don't have an answer for it? And I think that mindset is slowly shifting over time, but still has still kind of has its hooks in a lot of educators. What are when you're going in and working with teachers and students, what is the one thing that you try to leave behind for them to think about or to keep pushing forward? Like what do you hope that your experience ends with, or their thoughts that they keep about their time with you?
I try to create models, and I want to leave them with the idea that things need not be as they seem.
Hmm.
Um, to your earlier point about not being an expert in everything, that's a trope that kind of takes my breath away. Who
Hmm.
told you you were? Where in your education were you told you knew everything? It's preposterous. What I think might be different today, frankly, from when I got involved in educational computing in the early '80s, was um, what we were doing with computers and programming in the early and mid '80s was deeply rooted in progressive traditions and radical views of democracy, of the women's movement, the anti-war movement, civil rights. Um,
Hmm.
and there was literature around this. I mean, I've got 100 at least logo books. Some are great, some are terrible, but there was a literature about how to teach computing to children. And Logo came out of not only the Artificial Intelligence Laboratory at MIT, but it came out of Piaget, and it came out of Herb Kohl and Ivan Illich and folks who, Loris Malaguzzi and John Dewey, and it was explicitly about a different kind of educational experience and diet for children. And
Hmm.
and so as we've sort of torn off pieces of this, and all we're left with is gadgets and stuff to buy and things to do to generate a press release, it becomes harder for teachers to support and to buy into. So I mean,
Right.
you've been to constructing modern knowledge. We sort of we take an approach at
Hmm.
the whole. That the environment is different by design. The
Right.
expectations are different. There's conversations with smart people. We have there's sufficient time and a supportive culture and a range of expertise.
Hmm.
And it's rooted in powerful ideas that are bigger than ourselves. So
Hmm.
I when I work in a school, I try to create as many models as possible because um, I don't get the opportunity that I used to have. I mean, when I worked in the first laptop schools 33 years ago, um, I got to spend as much as 3 months in a school at a time, being able to
Right.
wander into classrooms and saying, "Hey, that's interesting. Why don't you try this?" Or, "Hey, stop doing that. Why don't you do it this way?" And could take teachers away and run workshops and talk to the principal and speak with parents and work with kids. And now I get, a day at a school, or so the
Right.
experience is different. So I try to create as many different kinds of models as possible, so that after I
Hmm.
leave, the teachers have something to think about and to share with one another, and that'll inspire them to continue to learn and grow on their own.
Absolutely. Well, I was really fortunate to be one of those schools that you worked with on those early deployment years. I mean, back at Eastern Townships when you came and did some workshops with us. But I will tell you that CMK, Constructing Modern Knowledge, is a ground changer for my trajectory anyway. And I think a lot of people that I kept in touch with that had gone to CMK, that it's like you said, Gary, it's like you walk in and it's like different and you feel like everything is possible. You're scared as heck, but you're so supported with everybody that's there and the faculty, and that the fear kind of washes away. Um, Tell me, what was the nucleus behind CMK? Well, like, I was there the second year of it. So I wasn't there the first year, but the second year we were still in the small room upstairs
Uh,
in New
oh,
Hampshire.
you should see it now.
Yeah, well, I went actually a few years later when
Yeah.
we had the huge area, and it was just amazing. But where did it come from? Like, where did the idea hatch itself?
Um, it, there are two sources. One was two great educators from New England, Dan and Molly Watt, who were giants in education during the mid '80s. Dan wrote one of probably the first educational computing book that sold over 100,000 copies. Learning with Logo, and Molly, and he had been part of the MIT Logo group in the '70s, and Molly was a progressive educator with roots in the civil rights movement, and women's movement. Um, and the two of them ran, when I started to go, 3-week long Logo institutes in rural New Hampshire. And that was at a time where teachers would come to a workshop for 3 weeks. They'd leave their families, and it's kind of extraordinary. And I went as a participant, and everything I know about teaching teachers, I learned from Dan and Molly. And actually, they're going to be back at CMK this July 11th to 14th, because I'm feeling a real obligation to document what the giants whose shoulders I stand on represented. And so they're going to be part of a Legends panel with Cynthia Solomon and Mother of Educational Computing. The other force, the other impetus for CMK was Seymour Papert and I used to have a lot of conversations where we would, be at a conference, or we'd pick up a magazine article and read how one of our heroes in progressive education had said another stupid thing about computers and modernity. About, we're throwing the baby out with the bathwater, or, kids shouldn't have computers when they should be doing X. And I used to say to Seymour, who had potentially infinite resources, not always the ability or willingness or interest in execution, Seymour, can't we get these people in a room and have a conversation with them and show them what we're talking about, and show them how what we're doing is wholly consistent with their life's work, and yet we're connecting kids to modernity in a way that's beautiful and humane and soul amplifying. And we had a lot of those discussions, and Seymour never pulled the trigger or created the thing, and I just decided, okay, if no one else is going to do it, I will. And so we've run 14 CMKs and kind of an abbreviated version that was in the middle of the pandemic, all on the smell of an oily rag, all on just people showing up, no sponsors, no exhibit hall. We've had ridiculous speakers who have been world changers, and not only just in thinking and education and technological pioneers, but folks who are the best at what they do in careers that their guidance counselors never imagined existed. We've had, I think, 4 MacArthur geniuses and a bunch of Grammy winners, and Nicole Hannah Jones before she was, the number one banned person in America, and Jonathan Kozol, and a lot of my heroes, and so CMK came out of that experience of creating this idyllic environment where people could construct knowledge, where they could fall in love with learning again. They could reacquaint themselves with their own power as a learner, to recognize that things need not be as they seem, and to spend time in the presence of people who are great at what they do. Whether that's another teacher they never met before, or the speakers that we've been able to wrangle. And it's the whole process is built on reciprocity of, there's a lot of rhetoric about teachers as learners, which, is often little more than rhetoric. But we learn a lot from our participants. We've everything from, throughout the year, I buy things that look interesting, that might be useful, and then we put it out on a table. And sometimes we don't even know which table to put it on, because we don't even know what the thing does. and some teacher figures out what it does and does something remarkable with it. So there's that kind of reciprocity where we learn from the participants. But it's also been really important to me and rewarding that Alfie Kohn and Deborah Meyer and folks like that, Lillian Katz and Leila Gandini and Carlo Rinaldi, have come to CMK as remarkable learner-centered educators who have forgotten more about learning than I'll ever know. And they look around and go, okay, I get it. And then their rhetoric and practice changes based on seeing what teachers are capable of. And when 85-year-old jazz legends see what teachers can do, it takes their breath away. And when I run into them at the Village Vanguard, they want to tell other musicians about this amazing thing they were at, this amazing event. So that's been important to me too. I mean, when Alfie Kohn called and said, why should I be on Twitter? Or I just took my kids to a Scratch workshop. That was and Deborah Meyer responds to each piece of our email about the upcoming institute, saying, "Oh, I wish I could come." And that's really rewarding for me as well.
Yeah, I think too that it's passed down. Like now, Gary, like you said, you stand on the shoulders of giants, but I feel like I stand on your shoulders. Like it feeds its way down through as the generations kind of roll through. I remember knowing that leaving there, I felt like I was something bigger, a bigger community, a bigger sense of what I could do and where I could go, that I didn't have before that. And I mean, it's a 3-day experience, but I think that I could speak truly, having attended a couple of times, that it changes your trajectory of your career. It did mine anyway. So I thank you for that. It's just really,
thank you for that. I mean, it means a lot. I mean, it's a really big rock to push up the hill every year. And people always ask, are we going to do it again? And the answer is always, don't know. I do it because it has to exist, but it's hard to keep it going. And I mean, it's physically hard. It's every part of it is hard. The risk is hard.
Schlepping,
the schlepping, when it's over and we come home and then a week later the truck pulls up with it in boxes and I have to put it away again. It's hard. And one of the another connection. One of the things I love so much about jazz musicians is the hang and the reverence for continuum. That you're supposed to be leaving the campsite better than you found it. You're supposed to be building upon something that came before you. I've been doing a talk. I'm working on a book called The Case Against Innovation, and I say, like genius or supermodel, you don't get to call yourself an innovator. That's for like history to determine. That's for other people to judge. And the people who call themselves innovators, you can bet they can't point to an actual innovation. And you could see a lineage through the jazz musicians that I love, and I'm really proud of the stories that I hear like yours that really move me. And the folks who tell me, oh yeah, that's that there was that time I went for soup dumplings with Caro Rinaldi, the grande dame of Reggio Emilia, or went for a walk with Edith Ackerman, who we sadly lost a couple of years ago, or I took a new job because of this, or someone tweeted I'd quit teaching and I'm going back because of the experience. And so I think about the discussions about teacher retention in the current crisis we're in, and I feel an obligation and to keep going. And I think find that's the greatest reward of running this like insane event that we do every year.
Yeah, absolutely.
And just the folks, the small team of faculty who donate their time and who've gotten to the point where I can raise an eyebrow or point in a direction of a corner of the room and they know exactly what to do and how little information to dispense to ensure that I always say less us, more them, so that the learner can have the richest experience possible. When you would know. I mean, I've worked with other people who just can't shut up, kind of like me now, but and who are terrible in teaching in that kind of environment. I don't know if it was the year that you were at CMK, but we had a guest speaker who nearly ruined CMK forever. They not only went an hour long, but then when they were done, someone said, can we use the projector? I said, oh, sure, of course. And then they sat down for another longer lecture. And that's, I literally never spoke to the person again. I never spoke to the person again. And it changed. It really did nearly irreparable harm to the experience of spend time with someone, get inspired, and then go back to your work. When it's, there's a lot of people who are just quite happy to sit in a chair and listen. But that's why we don't use the word conference. It's not a conference. It's an institute. It's a workshop. It's somewhere where learning is active. And so having faculty who I can rely on to literally with a gesture to know exactly what to do and know more is quite rewarding as well.
For sure. I love too that because you do make people accountable because they have to attach themselves to a project. And I think the reflection that happens at the end of each day, because then you're asked, how did it go today? What went on? What happened when you hit a wall? How did you overcome, the challenges that you were facing? So it really does make you a part of it all just through the structure of how you've set it up, which
right. There's a lot of flexibility and undesign that's by design. I mean, even from the, make a friend go to lunch, come back when you're done, is a piece of it. But yeah, I mean, even, we try to be non-coercive. So, reflection is voluntary. There are schools that use reflection just as a form of test. And I don't think reflection is a particularly valuable pursuit for kids. I don't think they're particularly reflective. I think that they could have used that time more productively on making their project better, or asking a deeper question or testing a larger hypothesis. And oftentimes a teacher can learn as much as they need to by sitting next to a kid or chatting with them as they head out the door, as opposed to let's sit in a circle and reflect. And then that gets with it all the trappings of writing things down and organizers and all this stuff that I couldn't care less about. And even there, I mean, we know which members of our team are better at leading those reflection circles. When Dan and Molly were part of the Institute, they're like the yo-yo ma of that. It's breathtaking. I can't even describe how good they are at it. I don't understand it. I will never understand it. I don't lead those discussions because it's kind of heavy-handed if I'm there just by my personality and people want to suck up to me because it's my event, or I don't I don't get involved in the reflections in that way. We've had colleagues who are like the loveliest people. If you put them in charge of a reflection circle, people just complain about stuff. And it's like, well, that's weird. How'd that happen? And so okay, you're not doing that anymore. So there's kind of there's an X factor to leading that, which is also probably another reason why we shouldn't make every teacher do it every Thursday or every third day or every second period, or that it's not just let's just sit in a circle and stare at each other. And I mean, I had this experience when I worked with Seymour Papert on my doctoral research. We created a high-tech, multi-age alternative learning environment inside a prison for teenagers. And I remember it was the end of 99. And we were going into the new millennium, and everybody was talking about the future and the past. And we put these kids in a circle, and we had all the junk food we could carry in the middle of the circle, and soda and all kinds of treats for the kids. And we were going to have a discussion about, the most important invention of the last century. And it was Seymour Papert and myself and David Cavallo, who was a faculty member at the MIT Media Lab, an interesting guy. And I remember the kids were just getting up and leaving the conversation and going back to working on their projects. And I remember thinking how funny it was that people probably would have paid money to witness this conversation. But for most of the kids, they just had other work to do. And why were we bugging them with this nonsense? And it was kind of like, get over yourself. It was just fine. They could walk away from it and go back to working on something else. And left the three adults to have the conversation.
Yeah, for sure. I can see that too in the things that you do, that, and I feel it too, that students really are at the heart of, and you just learn so much from them. I mean, they just, they have less luggage, and they just, they love when they're inspired by something and they're into it. Just let me do it. Stop interrupting me.
I mean, if I have a superpower, my teaching superpowers is a whole bunch of stuff I don't care about that a lot of other people take really seriously. And so at CMK, we go through this ritual of project planning, and then we ask people to bunch up, and then, we take the temperature, and we, if someone doesn't look like they're participating, we try to find out what's going on, or we invite them to join another group. Or, one year we had a guy who basically went to a blackboard with a pointer and was lecturing his team, and everyone was too polite to leave, and we were trying to bust it up. And, the second morning I just said, I just got off the phone with the Pope. He said, I can annul any group that's not working. You're under no obligation to stay with anybody. But we've also had teachers who have said to us, hey, I'm just kind of watching. I'm just kind of lurking. I needed the headspace. I need to see what this looks like. I needed to get away from the stress of and craziness of my school. And this is the perfect experience. And so, okay, cool, we're good. We won't bug you again. There's no kind of time on task, concerns. And again, that's kind of the ethos of open education movement in the 60s and the Reggio Emilia approach. And that when you create a productive context for learning, the natural default will be learning.
Yeah. Well said. Well said. Well, Gary, I want to thank you for coming and just spending a bit of time. I do recommend anybody out there that's listening, CMK Constructing Modern Knowledge, July 11th to 14th this year, right, Gary?
Yes, and we have a pre-institute workshop on the 10th on play, the intersection of play and digital technology and learning, led by two colleagues from the Fondazione Reggio Emilia in Reggio Emilia. Oh, wow. This workshop won't be offered anywhere else. So that's kind of a bonus. But yeah, July 11th to 14th, just go to constructingmodernknowledge.com.